Welcome, everybody. Our teacher tonight is John Sennhauser. If you don't know him, he's a senior teacher whose involvement with Shambhala began in 1977 when he went to Naropa Institute in Boulder, Colorado to study in the dance and theater departments. He was at the time an attorney in Seattle representing Native Americans. He became a student of Chögyam Trungpa Rinpoche, and then after his death became a personal secretary of Sakyong Mipham Rinpoche, the current lineage holder of Shambhala. John teaches from a perspective of integrating his personal background and experiences with the traditional and innovative teachings of Shambhala Buddhism. So, John, I hope your connection is working. You want to jump in and start your evening? All right, we're struggling with some connections with John. So here's my suggestion.
Yes, hi everybody. I'm just going to ask briefly, is there anybody here that has not meditated before or
This will be an interesting experience, guys. Let's just let's sit. When John sorts out his connection, he can come on and ask. What he was asking is if anyone needs meditation instruction. Can I just get a show of hands here? Does anyone actually need meditation instruction? I think I recognize most of you, and it's probably not necessary. I'll shoot him a little note. Let's just sit together, and hopefully John will sort out his connection in time for us to hear his talk in about 20 minutes time or so.
well, I moved everybody hear me? Dan?
This is better, John. I had them all sit.
Okay.
Much better. We got
Right.
no takers for meditation instruction, John. We have one person who just did learn to meditate.
Okay.
Everybody else looks like an old hand.
Okay, great. So we'll sit for about 15 or 20 minutes. And then we'll proceed with the talk and questions and answers. So we can just begin now. If you don't want to stare into the screen, it's fine to cut your video or move anywhere you would like. And I'll just ring a little gong, which will bring us back. Okay? Good evening, everyone. Sorry about the disturbance. Can you hear me all right? Yeah? Great. Well, it was all set up in another apartment, which I thought had great connections, and of course it didn't. So fortunately, I had another place to go. So one thing I wanted to say that I didn't because I wasn't really here when you began meditating is, in general with meditation, it's really good before you start the actual technique of meditation and sit on your cushion, just to check in with yourself and see how you're feeling. Because probably you've been engaged in something else prior to that. Ordinarily, I would say you're coming in from work or out on the street. In this situation, you're probably doing something else in your apartment. So maybe it's a less abrupt change, but in any case, rather than just sort of plop down on the cushion and then bam, start with the technique, it's good just to check in with yourself. How does my body feel? How am I feeling emotionally? So that we're coming as we are into our practice with however we're feeling at the moment. We're not trying to now shift gears into meditation to be a good meditator. If we were upset about something, if we were feeling sad or feeling whatever, we just bring that with us. As Pema Chodron often says, start where you are. We're not trying to escape from anything. And then just after checking in, then can begin by checking in with your posture, putting your awareness on the breath, working with thoughts as they come up. So tonight, we're going to talk a little bit about cultivating resilience in the context of turbulence, which we're all going through, but also just in general. And I want to say right at the start that I don't hold myself out at all as being a special teacher in this area, even prior to the crisis that's going on. But I'm just trying to share with you anything that I've learned through this, and also just in general how the practice of meditation and study will be able to help us to cultivate our own resilience in this much harsher kind of circumstances that we're all facing. So it's a tool that's been around so to speak, for 2,500 years. And I think that it becomes even more important and more useful to have this as a resource now when the conditions are so difficult and so dire. This meditation practice is one that has sort of stood the test of time. And it's quite amazing sometimes to read about the resilience of Tibetan monks, for example, or people in concentration camps that develop the kind of resilience to go through horrible, horrible situations and circumstances. And I think in large part, it's said that that's because of some kind of spiritual resilience that they all had, whatever the nature of it was, whatever religion it was or whatever. So I think we can all understand that resilience has a quality of flexibility, of elasticity. When something is stretched far, including ourselves, there's a quality of not breaking apart, of flexibility, of absorbing the situation as best we can, maybe little by little, bending with the winds. You know, they say that trees have great resilience in storms. They bend because they're grounded in the earth, the roots. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in this context. You know, riding a horse, which has a lot of use in our traditions of riding the horse of our own mind. And the mind can get destabilized. It can get anxious. The horse can get jumpy. And so learning how to ride the horse, learning how to ride our own mind is through the development of resilience. We're staying on the horse. Or if we get thrown, which we do, we get back on the horse and keep going through whatever ravines or storms or unexpected circumstances can arise. There's sort of a suppleness to resilience. It's not just being strong as a rigid kind of form, but there's a bending quality of well, the other day I was talking to my mother-in-law and we were talking about this and I said, oh, it's really hard sometimes just to, you know, stay okay. And sometimes I feel depressed and sometimes I feel anxious. And she's 91 years old and she's been through the Depression and World War II and the death of her husband. And she said, well, John, you just have to roll with the punches. And you know, that's the sense of resilience. And sort of appreciated that because these are certain punches in our gut. So I want to talk first a little bit about, in general, resilience. And I want to just give some attribution to a senior teacher in Shambhala, Acharya Fleet Mall, that has been teaching more on this recently and comes from an amazing background of coming from an upper class family in St. Louis, Missouri, had everything given to him, was caught up in drug trade in the 1980s, landed in federal prison for 15 years, and everybody thought that was the end of Fleet. And lo and behold, just his own practice and his own resilience, he came out and to be quite an amazing person. I knew him before and afterwards, and talk about resilience, which of course is developed through adverse circumstances. It's not just developed because it's theoretical or we sort of try to prepare ourselves mentally, but it's actually going through the adverse circumstances that develops the resilience. We have to be willing to go through the fear or go through the emotions or go through the sometimes physical obstacles in order to develop that resilience. Shambhala teaches a lot about the way to fearlessness is not around fear, but through fear, going through it and experience it. And that's actually how we begin to develop that resilience and get to the point of some kind of confidence in ourselves and courage. So Fleet Mall in general divides it into 4 categories. And I just want to sort of talk about this a little bit because I think it's helpful to give some broader view. He talks about physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual resilience. And physical resilience is really about our body and how do we take care of it? What do we eat? Are we being good to our body? Are we strengthening our body? Are we not overloading it? What are we eating? Are we eating a lot of sugar? What are we drinking? What are we ingesting? What are we smoking, if anything? And there's a sense of really taking care of it, hydrating our body, exercising our body. And this is all aside from the current crisis, but it's developing physical resilience. So it means exercising and moving our body so it doesn't become stiff and brittle, which is sort of the contrary condition of resilience, is keeping it moving, exercising it, stretching it, keeping it working, so that we're like a tree that can actually sway in the wind rather than fall apart, break apart. Now, connected to the physical is the breath, which, as you know, is a big part of meditation practice. But even aside from that, it's very interesting, the research that's been done more about this is that actually, physical, all these 4 components, physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual, all connected. They don't stand apart, but it's sometimes helpful to separate them for a point of discussion. But within the sense of physical resilience is the breathing that happens in our body. And the breathing and the breath and the body and the emotions and the external world are also connected, so that when we get triggered, when we hear the word COVID-19, or we hear any number of words, it's a trigger, and it could be upsetting. It could be we think, well, I've heard it before, but there is a sort of something in our primitive brain that that's a fear word, and the body reacts to it, and the sympathetic nervous system, we often will take a gasp. We breathe in when we're shocked, like, oh my God. And it's the in-breath, and it sends out the fear and flight and freeze kind of response. And the chemicals in our body, the anxiety, the protection, and it's the way we protect ourselves, actually. It's a survival response. It's not a bad response. But these days, in general, we have too much of that, and certainly during this crisis, a lot of it. And so you could say the body has its own built-in antidote, which is the parasympathetic nervous system, which is a calming part of our nervous system. And that's basically connected with the out-breath, or the exhale. That actually is that system triggering or kicking in to calm down our kind of panicky response. And so it's very helpful to consciously do breathing exercises. If we feel overwhelmed by this sense of anxiety hormones rushing through our body, or even just in general, so that one exercise that's been developed by a number of people is, and this is not in the context of meditation, it could be before you meditate, sort of getting ready to, or any time during the day. I tend to do it in the morning often when I wake up from vivid dreams these days, so that you take a nice long deep in-breath and then you exhale. The exhale is always going to be longer than the inhale. And so let's say you could inhale for 4 seconds and then you exhale for 6 seconds. And you can do that for 2 or 3 minutes, and it can have a calming effect on the body. So that interrelationship between breathing and the physical body, and in turn, the emotional component of our being, since it's all connected. So that's not considered a meditation per se. I just want to make that clear, but I find it very helpful these days, particularly to do that kind of an exercise where the inhale is 4 seconds or whatever you want it to be, and the exhale is always longer than the inhale, and help stabilize the body and the mind. So, in terms of mental, basically taking care of our, and the older we get, the more important that is. And I'm sure you read things about ways to keep the plasticity of the mind, the brain going, doing crossword puzzles, learning new things, studying new things. And I'm finding during this period particularly that there's more opportunity to engage in new interests. I have a history book, The History of the World, which has been sitting on my shelf for years. And I just picked it up the other day and decided to start reading it. And I was a history major in college, and I love history. But it's quite fascinating just to get new information and get stimulated by something that has nothing really to do with what's going on in terms of this crisis, maybe indirectly, but it's good exercise for the brain. There's emotional resilience, which is really about fundamentally having a healthy relationship to our own emotional being and being able to express that with others. So it's about emotional resilience, has a lot to do with communication with ourselves, to know even what we're feeling and not to suppress or repress things, which is going to cut off any kind of relationship to ourselves and make us less resilient. It's like being stiff emotionally, tight. And once we have that sense of relationship with ourselves emotionally, we're then able to express it to others. So whatever form that would take, what would be appropriate and helpful, or choose not to express it. But there's a flow, there's a kind of suppleness and resilience with our own emotional state that we share or not share with others. And then finally, spiritual resilience. And in some ways, you could say that spiritual resilience is sort of the underpinning, the ground of resilience altogether, at least from my experience. and what has been taught. The other factors you could say are somewhat conditioned, how our body is, the limitations physically. There's going to be physical limitations, physical resilience limitations, especially as we get older or we're ill. Our ability to tolerate certain things. I'm amazed sometimes. I practiced law for a number of years, and now when I read certain legal things, I'm amazed that I was able to ever digest that mentally. And you could say that's somewhat conditional, but in spiritual resilience, we're talking about something that's fundamentally unconditional, that's enduring, that's always going to be there, that we can rely on and count on. It's a sense that we have a much greater dimension than just ourselves, that there's a bigger connection, there's a vaster connection to the world, to nature, to other people, that transcends just me, all about me. It's much bigger than that. And it's also much deeper than that. So you could say in some ways, different traditions have different ways of expressing that, whether it's God, whether it's nature, whether it's the Tao, Taoism. It's something much more profound and all pervasive that runs through our life and even goes beyond the notion of conceptual understanding. It's sometimes considered inexpressible, but we know what it is when we connect to that. I know here in New York during these times, I'm much more aware of nature, of hearing the birds sing because there's less noise on the streets. I'm spending more time in the parks just looking at the sky. And it's sort of an interesting opportunity that there's some greater depth of experience that's possible. And it's not all feel good. It can be profound senses of sorrow and sadness and connection to many, many people that we didn't really feel like we had much connection to before. And I think extraordinarily, it's worldwide. And that sense, that's about some spiritual, I don't want to say component because that makes it separate, but it seems to underlie everything. And in this tradition, it really is about our human nature, which you may have been familiar with the term of basic goodness or Buddha nature, that is who we are as human beings, that is profound and vast and often inexpressible, but it is who we are as humans, just as you could say fire is hot and water is wet. We are basic goodness. We are Buddha nature, and that is unconditional. And when we can connect to that, and we don't always do because we're often busy in our lives, and we can relax into that, feel it, there's a felt sense, then that's a sense of resilience. Like, I'm going to get through this. We're going to get through this. Our teacher, Trungpa Rinpoche, when people used to doubt themselves and question their ability to go through things, whether it's jobs or relationships or whatever, he often would just smile and say, "You can do it. You can do He had confidence in us because the basic teaching is that we can have confidence in ourselves because that our nature is that. Our nature is supple, resilient, basically decent. It's our nature. It's at a, you could say in some forms of these teachings, it says it can be expressed as wisdom, human compassion, human strength. And the strength, I think all of them connect to the idea of resilience. That if we can connect to those qualities, we can develop our own resilience in the face of tremendous obstacles. One could say that this, our nature, our human nature, our basic goodness, can you hear me now? Yeah, okay. It's our anchor. You could say we're anchored in our unconditional basic goodness, our human nature. It's the source of our strength and our wisdom and our compassion to basically get through difficult situations. So in the context of meditation, which is the way we can access and cultivate our connection to basic goodness, cultivate our strength, our wisdom, our compassion, is through the practice of meditation. There are other ways, which we've talked a little bit about, just connecting to nature, reading the Dharma, reading the teachings, and contemplating them so that they become part of our own experience and they become real to us. They're not just theoretical. Meditation is considered the way it actually becomes part of us. It's already part of us, you could say. We're not creating it, but it's the way we connect to it and becomes a more palpable ground for us to relax into and feel like we have some confidence. So when we begin to practice, it's very important just to check in with ourselves and then to actually maybe go through our points of posture so that we actually feel like we're sitting on the ground. So there is a sense of groundedness, but there's also a sense of sitting upright so that we're sitting on the earth, but we're sitting up as human beings. And breathing naturally and fully. And there's a sense in our body of being still. The quality of stillness is really interesting because stillness is not freezing up. Within stillness, you could say there's all sorts of movement within our body. within our mind. Like a still pond is not frozen. There's movement on the pond, but it's still, it's not turbulent. And I've been reflecting more on that sense of stillness recently. It's an interesting word to contemplate just on your own. And sometimes, you know, the instructions often are in terms of meditation in everyday life, simply stop, you know, that sense of suddenly stop, just cut through the thoughts. Here I am, come back to the present, be here now, all that sort of abruptness, which is fine because sometimes we do have to sort of snap ourselves out of some long storyline. But after we do that, just be still for a while in post meditation practice. Just be still, just be there. Don't carry on with whatever you're doing now that you've come back, but actually enjoy that sense of stillness. And along with that, and I think there's more opportunity now, that sense of silence, that within silence, there's tremendous sounds. So, you know, the sounds of silence, the song. So silence has a lot to do with not talking. And so I think it might be interesting for you in your own time just to contemplate, and not just contemplate, but just have that experience of stillness and silence and see what comes up, what we can connect to in those moments. I think it's quite profound, actually, and ironically, more possible in these days where we're perhaps alone more, where there's more quiet in our apartments or on the street, and less movement around. And by doing that, I think we can discover some kind of deep resilience to things that throw us, or to worries, or to, if we can just be still and silent in the moment and realize that right now I'm fine, I'm safe, I'm just here. And there's some magic to that. And then when we begin to practice back on the cushion, having some sense of groundedness and upliftedness, and trying to relax into that, the sense of putting our awareness on the breath. And the idea here is that the breath is a support. It's a support for us, for our busy mind, to be able to rest on something. Just like if our body is tired, if it's nervous, if it's jangled, we lie down on the bed or the couch.
Let's sit quietly on our cushion until we get John back.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me again? Yeah?
We're with you, John. You're good.
Okay.
Welcome back.
Thank you. In the context of resting our mind on the breath, it's helpful in the context of what I was saying about the exhale and the out breath to perhaps put more awareness on the out breath when we're practicing. So the in-breath happens, and then we actually put our awareness on the out breath, relax, let it go out. It sort of dissolves into space, and we're just there in the space. And it has a kind of a calming effect on our mind and our body. So a little more emphasis of awareness on the out breath. If you get more distracted, then you can do it on the full cycle of the breath again. But the out breath has that quality of calming and engaging the parasympathetic nervous system. And it's important also as we're sitting in stillness, is a sense of opening out. We can be still, we can be quiet, and at the same time we can expand, let our sense organs open up and hear the sounds, hear the silence, hear whatever, see the colors, feel the temperature in the room. This helps us to take in more. And as we take in more, that in and of itself develops resilience so that we're not quite so focused on our particular worry or anxiety at the moment. We're just opening out and expanding and letting the environment and feeling part of the environment rather than the small corners of our mind, which might be fixated on something. And then, as we know, if we are distracted by thoughts or emotions or whatever, and we're carried away, we just notice that, perhaps label it thinking, we come back to the environment, come back to our breath, our out breath, feel our body, and relax into that. And by doing that, we can begin to feel a more sense of that basic goodness of our own self and the world altogether. The vividness of the colors, the sound of the birds, somebody laughing, whatever it is. It opens us out more. And that sense of openness is very much a part of our basic goodness of our nature. That openness has a sense of flexibility, has a sense of resilience. That we're open to things, that we can work with things, that we're not shutting things off, because when we shut things off, we're actually tightening up. I don't want to deal with that, or I want this to go away. And that makes us less resilient. So clearly in our lives, we've been developing resilience in many ways, in all the ways we've talked about. Most oftentimes unconsciously, things don't happen as we expected. We roll with the punches, so to speak. We adjust to it. We accept it. We make changes. And sometimes it could have been very abrupt for us in our lives, of relationships ending, losing people unexpectedly, losing jobs. but also, positive things that we didn't expect. And we're resilient in the sense that we accept it in, we absorb it. Sometimes unknowingly, we move through it and we change and we move forward. Now, when things are much more severe, we've all had those in our life already, it's much harder. And so we sort of need to, in some ways, have a resilience reserve. And that's why it's important, even when we're feeling well and healthy, to still exercise and eat well. And we all know what it's like when we don't eat well, and then we feel shitty. And then we say, oh, Jesus, I don't know why I ate all that stuff or drank all that stuff or whatever. And we sort of come back to eating well again. So it's important to have a reserve. But when things are really tough, and this is what I would say, this whole crisis was quite unexpected for most of us. Other people have warned about it, but it sort of came on so quickly. I'm trying to remember the days I went out with friends in early March for brunch one day, and all of a sudden it was like, no more, bam. And in some ways it was like an earthquake. And we were and are shaken up, at least I was. We're literally shaken up emotionally, and it affects our physical state, sleeping not well, or whatever it is. And so this is a big one. And it's really important that in this case, we can continue to take care of ourselves physically and emotionally. But for me, I find it's even more important to do the practice of meditation, is to read the Dharma, is to contemplate it, and to connect more deeply with this fundamental unconditional state of basic goodness that is our ground. And it doesn't mean we're not going to feel any pain, for sure. Not going to mean that at all. We may even feel more pain, but it's the reality of pain, rather than just it's all in our head. And it's the kind of suffering we can create beyond the pain of the reality that's going on now. And I think in the practice of meditation, as we become more in touch with our own innate strength and wisdom and compassion, we do develop resilience, and we feel that we can go through this with some sense of confidence and ability to help others. I know sometimes when we're stressed out, it sort of feels hard. I have enough to do is take care of my own state of mind, but it enables us to move beyond ourselves, trust ourselves that we have more resilience than we think we do, and reach out and help others in any way that we can. So I think that's all I want to say right now. It was maybe too much, but I'd love to have any discussion or questions about that, or sharing your own experiences of this, things that resonated with you or didn't. So whatever you would like to talk about.
You can just unmute yourself and jump in if you like. It's a small enough group.
John, that was lovely. Thank you. It really feels like it anchored sort of gave me some ground in this incredible period that we're going through, challenges. And it particularly, I love the way what you're talking about complements and sort of what I feel like is the cutting edge of psychology and psychotherapy today, that there's essential quality that we have as sentient beings, that resiliency is inherent to who we are. It's not like something we have to aspire to. Yeah, and that's part of, I guess, one of the qualities of basic goodness that I would connect with, and that through the Dharma, through the practice, we have been gifted with these incredible, skillful means to kind of ride this wild ride, this turbulence that we're experiencing. So thank you for bringing this sanity to our fore. Right.
You're welcome. Welcome. I'm glad it helped. Did what I say resonate with you, or was there parts that you found yourself wondering about, or questioning?
John, this might be one of those moments where getting back to basics is very, very important. And in many ways, you seem to be stating the obvious in moments, but that's what needs to be stated, I think, these days, is having that ground and knowing how to, having a tool to be able to remind oneself of one's skills and the fact that the ground is there. That's always very helpful.
Yeah, I think that one thing I did leave out is that the ground is always there. It's just that we lose awareness of it. And I notice for myself, sometimes I feel like when I'm caught up in the storm, I'm just completely caught up in it. And I'm not really aware. I'm not reflective of I'm caught up in the storm. I'm not seeing myself being caught up in the storm. Not exactly. So I'm not identified. I'm identified only with the storm and not with the, well, Pema Children is wonderful. She says that our mind is the open sky and the rest is the weather. And so I think sometimes we're caught up in the weather. We identify with the weather and perhaps not identifying with the fact that we're an open sky, and within that, with that openness, that awareness, there's a storm going on within us or outside of us, but certainly we feel it. And then I think the more we practice and come back to, oh, here we are, rather than being caught up in the storm on the cushion, we come back, oh, here I am. we train our mind, and so that our mind will naturally come back to that open awareness on its own, which it does anyway on the cushion. You know, we say, oh, I was thinking, but something brings us back, and that's awareness. And we have to cultivate that awareness so that it happens more automatically. And that's what practice actually does. We practice it over and over so that we train the mind almost unconsciously to come back to open awareness. And then we don't forget about our ground. We actually feel like we're in it, but we also feel the storm at the same time. It's not one or the other. It's not binary. We can actually experience the storm and experience it in the open sky at the same time. Well, unless somebody has something they would like to add or share or ask questions, we could probably call it a night. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for coming, and be well.